In the vast theater of American immigration, where laws intersect with lives and policy collides with personhood, the situation has never felt more volatile. Every day, headlines scream stories of raids, removals, and the relentless machinery of ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, driven by political ambition, systemic inertia, and the enduring myth of national security at any cost. What was once whispered is now screamed through shattered windows and families torn apart at dawn. In border towns and sanctuary cities alike, the undocumented live with a constant undertow of dread, fear that every knock on the door might be the last they hear in freedom. But now, even those born on American soil are no longer safe. Citizens, yes, U.S. citizens, are finding themselves in ICE custody, victims of mistaken identity, bureaucratic failure, and institutional disregard. These are not anomalies, these are warnings. Behind every statistic lies a name. Behind every name, a story. Behind every story, a silent scream in a language the system refuses to understand. In the name of security, lives are shuffled like paperwork, people reduced to digital errors, and justice left waiting in a cell with no charges, no explanation, and no apology. The chaos is no longer just on the margins. It has metastasized to the core. When citizenship is no longer protection, what is left? As court dockets overflow and detention centers swell, the moral compass of a nation spins, seeking direction in a storm of legalese and executive orders. ICE has become not just an enforcer of law, but a mirror reflecting the cracks in America's conscience. And in those cracks, the light of truth sometimes leaks through, brief, piercing, undeniable. Today's story is not about someone crossing a border illegally. It's about someone who never left home and was still taken. The story begins right here. It was a Monday morning in El Paso, Texas, sunlight just breaking over the Franklin Mountains, a city slowly waking. At a quiet suburban home, 26-year-old Carlos Domínguez was sipping coffee, flipping through the classifieds. A welder by trade, he had been laid off a month earlier and was hunting for his next job. His wife, Rosa, a nurse, had left for the early shift, and their twin daughters were still sleeping upstairs. When the knock came, it was steady. Not loud, not frantic, just official. Carlos opened the door, expecting a neighbor, maybe a package. Instead, he met two men in plain clothes, their badges flashed with deliberate ease, their stance already halfway into the house. Carlos Domínguez? Yes, he replied instinctively, stepping back. You're under investigation. We need to bring you in for questioning. Please cooperate. No explanation, no warrant shown, just a pair of cold hands cuffing his wrists. Carlos barely had time to call upstairs, "Mia, stay with the girls," before he was walked out to an unmarked vehicle. His daughters peered from the window. One of them cried, asking, "Where is Papa going?" At the ICE field office, Carlos was fingerprinted, photographed, and told there was a problem with his documentation. He protested. He was born in New Mexico. He had a driver's license, a social security card, even served jury duty. But his protests were met with silence, then skepticism. "Your name matches someone on our list," one agent said. That was all it took. A name, a match, no further verification. By nightfall, Carlos was shackled again and moved to a detention center in Sierra Blanca, 4 hours away. His phone was confiscated. His family left with no answers. No call came, just the echo of a door that had closed behind him. For ICE, it was a routine operation. For Carlos, it was the erasure of identity in real time. A citizen vanished, trapped in the machinery built for those deemed other. And in this cold procedural error, no one paused to ask, what if the system was wrong? But Rosa did. She began asking immediately, and she would not stop. Inside the Sierra Blanca detention facility, the fluorescent lights never dimmed. There was no sunrise or sunset, just the artificial hum of time passing with no calendar, no clock. Carlos Domínguez sat on a steel bench in a cement cell shared with 23 others, each man cradling his own confusion, fear, or fury. Some had crossed deserts. Others overstayed visas. Carlos had done neither. 3 days in, the silence began to strangle. He had spoken to no lawyer. No ICE agent came back to verify his claim of citizenship. The guards only called him Domínguez, without title, without question. One man from Honduras whispered, "You say you're American? That doesn't matter here." Meanwhile, back in El Paso, Rosa was unraveling. Her calls to local jails returned nothing. Immigration offices offered vague instructions and transferred her endlessly. When she mentioned that her husband was a U.S. citizen, she was met with hesitant replies. Well, he must have done something. ICE doesn't detain citizens. But ICE did. And they had. Finally, Rosa reached out to the ACLU. A young attorney, Elena Morales, took the call. She had heard this before. Not just once, not twice, but again and again. American citizens, mostly Latino men with Spanish surnames, wrongfully detained because someone somewhere didn't do their job or didn't care. With Rosa's help, Elena dug in. She found Carlos's birth certificate, school records, employment history, jury duty receipts, even his high school yearbook photo with the caption, "Born and raised in Las Cruces, NM." But ICE still refused contact. No visit, no hearing, just a wall. Days turned into a week. Carlos was losing weight and hope. In whispered conversations at night, he recited his daughter's names like a prayer. Lucia y Marisol. Lucia y Marisol. The other men listened quietly. One of them, an older man from Oaxaca, finally said, "You think being American makes you safe here? Not when the system's already decided who you are." Carlos wasn't just mistaken for someone else. He was mistaken for someone ICE believed he should be. And that belief, rooted in algorithm and assumption, was stronger than proof. Proof in this place meant nothing without permission to be heard. He hadn't disappeared. He had been taken. By mistake. And no one in power wanted to admit it. The numbers behind Carlos Domínguez's ordeal tell a damning truth. A truth ICE has been reluctant to acknowledge. According to TRAC Immigration, at least 674 U.S. citizens were detained by ICE between 2012 and 2023. That's not speculation. That's verified data. The real number may be higher, hidden in redacted files, sealed courtrooms, and misclassified cases where the word citizen never made it into the paperwork. The system, as it stands, doesn't just allow for mistakes, it creates them. At the heart of the problem is a software platform called Ident, an automated biometric database ICE uses to flag suspects. It cross-references names, fingerprints, and immigration violations. But what it doesn't do well, what it was never built to do, is confirm citizenship with certainty. If a person shares a name or partial match with someone flagged in the system, ICE can act without confirming status, without a warrant, sometimes even without a charge. Carlos Domínguez's name matched someone who once overstayed a visa in 1998. The man's middle name was different. His date of birth was off by 7 years. But ICE's field agents checked the box labeled Carlos suspected removable alien, and the machine started turning. Even after Rosa's attorney submitted Carlos's birth certificate and official records, ICE delayed. Their process of internal verification is often slow, opaque, and driven less by urgency than by institutional momentum. It took 13 days for Carlos to be released. 13 days without access to counsel. 13 days without a hearing. 13 days where the presumption of innocence meant nothing because the label foreign had already stuck. ICE spokespersons often deny wrongdoing using sterile language, isolated incident, investigative overlap, or pending verification. But to the people inside the holding cells, there's no ambiguity. There's only the sound of your own voice telling the truth while no one listens. This wasn't just about Carlos. In one case, a 19-year-old U.S. citizen was detained for 3 weeks after being arrested in Phoenix. In another, a man born in Michigan spent over a month in detention while ICE insisted he was Guatemalan. Mistaken identity in law enforcement is not new, but when it becomes institutionalized, when no one inside the system is held accountable for it, it stops being a mistake and becomes policy. From the polished marble halls of Washington to the cracked concrete floors of holding cells like Sierra Blanca, the ethical debate over ICE's power and procedures splits the nation like a fault line. On one side stand those who argue national security must prevail. They insist ICE is a necessary institution designed to protect citizens from those who break immigration laws. Mistakes happen, they admit, but the greater good demands vigilance. They point to overstretched agents, algorithmic complexity, and the difficulty of distinguishing identities in a sea of documents and databases. For them, Carlos Domínguez was an unfortunate casualty in a war to uphold law and order. But that argument collapses under the weight of its own hypocrisy. The same voices who cry for constitutional rights when it suits them fall silent when those rights are stripped from people with brown skin, Spanish names, or accents. Carlos wasn't an undocumented immigrant. He wasn't a fugitive. He was a citizen whose life was paused, dignity dismantled, and identity questioned by the very government meant to protect him. Does the state get to suspend someone's rights because of a clerical error? Can a man be imprisoned without a charge simply because his name sounds foreign? The U.S. Constitution guarantees due process. Yet in ICE's shadow system, due process becomes a privilege, one that can be denied if your skin is the wrong shade or your name echoes somewhere else. Some ICE defenders say the agency is just doing its job, that agents are following protocol. But history has never looked kindly on those who hide behind bureaucracy to explain away injustice. "I was just doing my job" is the same defense used in every era of systemic abuse, from segregation to internment, from stop and frisk to now. On the other side of the debate are voices rising not in protest, but in sorrow. Faith leaders, civil rights lawyers, and everyday citizens who ask, if we accept this treatment of Carlos, who's next? Who gets to define who belongs? Because when a U.S. citizen can be jailed with no warrant, no hearing, no apology, then citizenship itself begins to lose meaning, not just for immigrants, but for all of us. What ICE did to Carlos wasn't a glitch. It was a warning, a question. And that question echoes in every cell. Who are we becoming? The real cost of what happened to Carlos Domínguez can't be measured in paperwork or protocols. It's measured in sleepless nights, in a child's confusion, in a man's unraveling sense of self. The day Carlos came home, he didn't walk through the door with relief. He staggered. He had lost 14 pounds. His eyes had sunk deep into sockets that had seen too many lights that never turned off. He sat on the edge of his daughter's bed that night, unable to explain why their father had vanished. Lucia held his hand. Marisol asked, "Did you get lost, Papa?" He couldn't answer. His wife Rosa tried to be strong. But strength has its limits. She hadn't worked a single shift during those 2 weeks. She spent every day calling numbers, writing emails, showing up at government buildings where clerks shrugged and guards looked through her. Bills stacked up. Rent was due. She'd nearly lost her job. Carlos's employer, who had once promised to rehire him after the layoff, now hesitated. "We just need to check your paperwork again," they told him. It didn't matter that he was a citizen. The suspicion lingered. The stain didn't wash off. The world now saw him through the prism ICE had created, possibly undocumented, possibly expendable. He applied for legal redress. But suing ICE is like punching fog, slow, expensive, disorienting. No one took direct responsibility. The agents who took him never called back. The supervisors issued no apology. And in the system's cold machinery, Carlos remained just a released detainee, not a man who was wronged. His daughters began sleeping with the light on. Rosa started locking every window at night. Carlos stopped answering unknown numbers. These weren't just habits, they were scars. And he was not alone. Across the country, others like Carlos emerged from ICE detention confused, shaken, humiliated. A veteran in Nevada, a teenager in Louisiana, a grandmother in Arizona. They returned to lives forever altered, jobs lost, trust shattered, and an identity stolen, not by criminals, but by the very state that promised to protect it. The impact was real. It still is. And for families like the Domínguezes, healing is not just a process. It's resistance. Every breath Carlos takes now is a quiet protest. Every step forward is a reminder that freedom, once taken, even briefly, never feels the same again. Carlos Domínguez now walks his El Paso neighborhood like a ghost that once lived there. He is home, yet not whole. The front yard still blooms with Rosa's marigolds. The swing set still creaks when the wind blows. But something invisible lingers in the air. An ache, a weight, a betrayal wrapped in silence. He sometimes stares at the American flag in the schoolyard across the street, the same one he pledged allegiance to as a boy. Hand over heart, believing it meant something permanent, something sacred. Now, he wonders if that pledge ever included him at all, or if it was always conditional, waiting for someone to doubt his name, his language, his face. In quieter moments, he questions things he never did before. What does it mean to belong to a country that can erase you without blinking? What is citizenship if it's only respected when you look the part? And how many others walk free today, unaware that freedom is not guaranteed, but granted and taken at whim? Rosa, once proud and unwavering, has started whispering to neighbors in the grocery aisle, "Be careful, ICE is watching again." Their girls now draw pictures of locked doors and sirens. Trauma has settled in their household like dust in sunlight, impossible to sweep away, always returning when the light hits just right. Carlos tries not to hate the officers who took him. He tells himself they were just doing their job. But that phrase, once meaningless, now haunts him. Because just doing their job led to a man stripped of rights, dignity, and voice. Just doing their job created a cage around a citizen's soul. He dreams sometimes of testifying before Congress, of looking each lawmaker in the eye and asking, what if it had been your son, your father, your name in that file? But dreams like that fade when reality remains untouched. No reforms. No apologies. No acknowledgement. Still, in every story like Carlos's lies a terrible gift, a mirror held up to America's moral spine. What it reflects is not just ICE, not just policy, but who we are willing to forget when power goes unchecked. And the mirror doesn't lie. It only waits for us to look. If Carlos Domínguez's story rattled something in you, don't ignore it. You are not powerless. You are the public. You are the voice ICE doesn't expect to hear. Because the systems that stole 13 days of a citizen's life do not operate in silence. They operate in shadow. And only light, your light, breaks shadows. So what can you do? Share his story, not just with a click, but with conviction. Let your friends know. Let your family talk about it at the dinner table. Make it personal, because it is personal. When one citizen is stripped of rights, every citizen is made vulnerable. Demand transparency. Call your representatives and ask them what safeguards exist to prevent U.S. citizens from being wrongfully detained by ICE. Ask what accountability measures exist for agents who ignore evidence. Ask why routine error is used to excuse systemic failure. Support legal defenders. Organizations like the ACLU, NILC, and RACES are fighting these battles in courtrooms. ICE hopes stay quiet. Donate. Volunteer. Attend hearings. Your presence matters. Vote like it matters, because it does. Elect leaders who understand that immigration enforcement should never override constitutional rights, that a name doesn't make a man undocumented, that no one should be locked away without proof, without process, without cause. Ask questions in public forums. How does our community ensure no citizen is wrongfully detained? What local police departments share data with ICE? Can local governments refuse to cooperate with unjust detainers? Don't wait until it happens to someone you know. Carlos Domínguez was not a symbol. He was not a headline. He was a father, a neighbor, a citizen who woke up one day to find that his country had stopped recognizing him. And it could happen again. It does happen again. But with your voice, your action, your refusal to look away, it doesn't have to. Remember his name, remember his face, and don't let anyone tell you it's too late to change the ending. Not for Carlos, not for the next name on the list, not for us.